let's talk about introductory paragraphs for literary analysis. So for all essays, really, an introductory paragraph should start with a hook. Then you should give enough background or context that the reader will need to understand your thesis. And your thesis is like the one-sentence argument that you are going to prove with the body paragraphs of your essay. So for a literary analysis, you are going to start with a hook that should be something intriguing or relatable about the theme. So you will be exploring only one theme in your literary analysis, especially if you are writing a short essay, and by short I mean fewer than 7 pages. If you were to write about several themes in one work, you would need several essays or chapters or a really long essay. So that's going to be unlikely for most writers. If you're not sure what the theme is, I will add links to some good videos on finding themes. You can also look in handouts and other materials, textbooks that you have had for class. But the theme is what you want to start out addressing with the hook. And a theme, generally, you're just thinking of whatever it is that you think the author addresses well about life in general, about any common human experience or universal truth. For example, grief is a universal human experience. Love, family struggles, relationships, mourning, those things are universal human experiences. So pick one theme that you think the writer addresses with whatever work you're exploring and address that. In my sample, I have color-coded it so you see each part. I want to write a sentence for the hook that just addresses the theme without really mentioning the work of literature I'm exploring yet. So I want you to think about the theme and write a sentence that anyone who has not yet read this work of literature would understand, because you're guiding them into being interested in the work of literature you're analyzing. So here I have 2 sentences that serve as the hook that could be relatable to anybody concerning the theme that I have discovered in the birthmark or have chosen to write about. There will be many themes that you could choose from for each work of literature, but you're going to focus on one. So here is an example of what I'm talking about as a hook for your literary analysis. Relationships in which one person is asked to sacrifice his or her own values or personal well-being to satisfy another person's ego are unhealthy. In a culture with unhealthy standards of beauty, people often feel they must make up for being less than perfect looking by pleasing people in other ways. So just about anyone on the planet can relate to this situation, whether they've experienced it themselves or they have seen it in other people. So that's what you're talking about as far as coming up with a hook that addresses the theme. Now let me show you a student essay where they took the idea of addressing the theme in a different way, which is not what we're going for. They literally addressed the word theme and wanted to define theme. If you're at the level where you cannot clearly define theme on your own, then you're not going to be able to find a theme to analyze in the work of literature. So this is an example of what we're not trying to do. So you can pause here and see that all they have done so far is sort of talk about theme in general, what it is, and defined it using the textbook. So another thing to stay away from then is to not use quotations in the introductory paragraph. Generally, you want to save the quotations for your body paragraphs. And those should be illustrations and examples that help you illustrate the theme, or if you are required to use secondary sources, then you might have some of those that explore the theme in unique ways, that you can then use the primary source, the work of literature you're analyzing, to illustrate that point and either agree with your secondary source or refute what your secondary source proposes for that theme. This person did come up with a thesis statement that is okay, but all of this idea about, and it should just be one theme, so they should have started this paragraph talking about obsession, hubris, and sacrifice. And so as far as picking one, those can sort of be lumped together a bit. So, for example, you wouldn't want to have grief and love, or revenge and, I don't know, some other theme could be love or grief or growing up, or any of those themes that you might address. You don't want to have two that are just totally different, like you're writing two separate papers in the body paragraphs. So I would try to go for a word or two as far as the theme goes that are super related if you use more than one word. So make sure they're very much related. So these could probably pass, but we would need to start this paragraph talking in general about these things. And then the background and context part comes where you introduce the title of the story or poem or novel or play that you're analyzing, and give the author's name in there as well. And this person has waited until the thesis statement to do that, and we don't want to do it that late. So let's look again at the other one, where I show you the background and context that bridges to the thesis. That's where you first introduce the work that you're going to be analyzing. You don't want to wait until the thesis. So give your reader some kind of background and context after the hook. So here it is. In the short story, The Birthmark by Nathaniel Hawthorne, the beautiful Georgiana wants to please her new husband, Almer, so much that she is willing to sacrifice her very life so that he can be deemed the incredible scientist he is known to be. Although Georgiana is hesitant to let Almer experiment on her at first, Almer manipulates her by implying that he is distracted by the birthmark on her cheek, which he says is too hideous for him to endure. Now, that's kind of a synopsis of what happens in the story. I don't give every detail of the story. I give just enough for my reader, who may or may not have read the story, but generally you're going to assume that the person is familiar enough with the story that you don't have to give them a ton of detail about what happens in the story. So just let the story unfold, or let the synopsis unfold just enough of what you need to reveal about the plot to set up your thesis well. That's the background and context that bridges to the thesis. So that's what we're going for. And then your thesis is your one-sentence argument that you're going to prove throughout the body of the essay. And here's a possibility for one. Through the language concerning beauty in the birthmark, Nathaniel Hawthorne demonstrates the destructive nature of people-pleasing and pursuing impossible beauty standards. So that could probably still use some more work. And this is why I really, really encourage students not to try to even write the introductory paragraph or the concluding paragraph, which we can talk about is a reverse of the introductory paragraph. Don't write those until you have really, really spent some time on the body paragraphs. If you are required to do research, go ahead and do your research first. Build your body paragraphs based on the research you find. If you try to come up with ideas for your body paragraphs before you do your research, and you're required to do research and include direct quotations from secondary sources, and then you can't find secondary sources that will support the ideas that you are trying to write about in the body paragraphs, you are going to be miserable because it's going to take you forever and you're going to struggle, and it's just so much easier to go ahead and do your research first and build your argument based on what it is you can find. I know that doesn't seem as exciting as starting with your own ideas and then going to find the research that supports your ideas. But what you're doing when you are doing a researched literary analysis is you are looking to see what the research is already for that topic or that work of literature. And then you're contributing your own voice to the discussion. So it's like if you were in a room full of scholars on a certain work of literature and you were to approach a couple of those scholars talking and they were making points about the work of literature you're analyzing, you would be able to contribute your own perspective. So you might either agree with what they say and then add your point to that. So think more deeply about it and further that same point that they've already made, or you might refute what they've said. So you might say, if you were analyzing the Birthmark and you happen to find a scholar who defends the standards of beauty that seem impossible and seems to think that Hawthorne is brilliant for using this language of high beauty standards that are impossible to achieve, you might clearly, I think that's destructive. So I would refute a secondary source that might be praising Hawthorne for using that kind of language in this short story. So really think deeply about not only the work you're analyzing, but also the secondary sources that you find. It's really important to find your secondary sources and read them more than once. Annotate, make notes. If you find something questionable, then you might make a note about that. If you find something you can argue against, that's sometimes easier than agreeing with what they say and then trying to find a way to make that work with what you are going to prove, because you've got to contribute your own extension of that particular secondary source's ideas. But you can do it. I know that you can think deeply about these things and you can do an excellent job contributing your own analysis to what has already been said out there. You don't have to say something completely different. In fact, you should not say something completely different. You should be in conversation. So if someone's talking about, if you're quoting a secondary source that's talking about beauty standards, then you shouldn't quote that person and then talk about something completely different. Another tip for secondary sources, the direct quotations from secondary sources should be the ideas of those scholars. Don't use the secondary sources to quote the primary source, the work you're analyzing, because you have to quote that source yourself anyway. So you don't want to waste an opportunity to quote the primary source by taking it from the secondary source. Plus, it's not quoting a secondary source truly if you're just quoting what they have quoted from the primary source. Okay, so if you need help with that, please go see the tutors in the tutoring lab or use the online tutors, or come and see me and we'll talk about it. All right, I look forward to reading your essays. Let me know if you need any help.